Colorado children are counting down the weeks to their summer break, but by the time they return to school in the fall, many will show reduced math and reading skills because of what is sometimes called the fade-out effect. Tonight, we'll talk about the growth of summer learning programs and overall literacy in Colorado. Good evening, I'm Doug Price, and this is Colorado Quarterly for May 2013. According to the nation's largest nonprofit children's literacy program, Reading is Fundamental, 2/3 of low-income families in the U.S. have no books. The Justice Department reports 70% of those incarcerated in the nation's prisons can't read above the 4th grade level. Literacy is critical to the development of individuals, and the larger society has a real stake in seeing to it that all students have this very basic start. Joining me tonight on the eve of Colorado Literacy Week is our Lieutenant Governor Joe Garcia, arguably the best-known champion of education and reading skills in the state. We also have Lindsay Dolce, Executive Director of Serve Colorado and Colorado Reads, the Early Childhood Initiative, both under the auspices of the Governor's Office. And from the Horizon Summer Enrichment Program, Ingrid Moore, the Executive Director. Lindsay, tell us about Colorado Literacy Week, what it's all about, what are the goals?
Absolutely. So Colorado Literacy Week is coming up May 6th through the 10th here in Colorado, and the goals of Colorado Literacy Week are really to talk about where we are as a state, where we're going as a state, and to celebrate the accomplishments of the last year.
Great. Ingrid, it's ironic that in a week when we've had at least 5 inches of snow that we're talking about summer, but let's talk about the research on the summer fade-out effect.
Well, you mentioned it, and we often at Horizon call it the summer slide, and it really afflicts our lowest income students. They can be as much as 6 months behind grade level by the time they are entering kindergarten, and as much as 3 years behind grade level after 5th grade. So it's a huge issue, and we at Horizons are really working very hard and very deliberately to make sure that our kids not only don't have a summer slide, but also make gains in the summer in both reading and math.
We want to come back to you and talk a little bit about, not a little bit, we're going to talk a lot about what you actually do for your kids and how it can be modeled by parents at home. But first, Lieutenant Governor, the Early Literacy Initiative report of Colorado Reads 2013 is being released next week. Give us a preview of what it's going to say.
Well, let me tell you first about why we're doing it, why this is so important, because we know that in Colorado, fully 28% of our kids leaving 3rd grade are not reading at grade level. And those kids who aren't reading at grade level when they leave 3rd grade fall further and further behind as they continue through the K through 12 system, and they're far less likely to graduate. So we need to be addressing that very early on. It's not an issue of 3rd grade, it's 2nd grade and 1st grade and kindergarten and preschool, and importantly, what happens in the home. So Early Literacy Week is really about raising awareness, why this is so important and what we can do about it.
Let's talk a little bit about school readiness. It's one of my favorite topics, as you guys all know. But the summer slide, school readiness, really the two top impacts on reading with kids. So Lieutenant Governor, you're in charge basically of the early childhood education system in Colorado. Give us a sense of why readiness is so important and how you're changing the way early learning is provided.
Well, one of the things that's clear is that historically we've tended to blame the school system when kids fall behind. And yet, when those kids first arrive at school, there's already a significant gap. And so schools are in a very difficult position of trying to close that gap. What we want to do is try to avoid having such a wide gap in the first place. So we need to work with parents and families and early childhood education centers and social service agencies to make sure that kids have books at home. You mentioned that many kids do not even have a book at home, and it's hard for middle-class parents to imagine. And they certainly aren't read to, so they are behind. Their vocabulary is much more limited. Let's figure out how to work with parents and libraries and early childhood education to make sure that gap doesn't exist, or at least it's not quite so wide when they first show up for preschool.
We want to talk a little bit more about the issue of resources, because I think that's a really big one. When we look, Ingrid, at parents, there's this growing disparity between affluent, middle class, and poor. Not just, in the old days you'd think, oh, we have the middle class and we have the poor, but today you have 3 really differentiated pods between the most affluent, middle class, and poverty. Give us a sense of what's happened in that respect and how you're dealing with it.
So our population at Horizons is 100% low income. All of our students qualify for free and reduced lunch at their schools. So it is a very distinct population of low income families. My experience with these families is that they very much want what's best for their children. They very much want to be given the tools, like we all do, on how to help their children be successful. And we at Horizons are trying to do that not just for the kids, but for the parents as well. We've established a parent council where we can talk with the parents about the importance of reading to their kids at home, having their children read to them if they don't feel comfortable reading themselves. We also provide books for our children to take home with them to start to create a home library so they can have that feeling of pride and ownership with the books that they've enjoyed during the day at the program.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say one of the things that is so critical as we talk about books and we talk about what's happening here in Colorado. Last year we decided to start an initiative statewide that's based on Preschool One Book, One Denver. It's called One Book for Colorado, but it is strictly looking at trying to instill a love of reading for kids at a very early age. So it's one book with the number 4, Colorado, because it gives every 4-year-old in the state a book. And through a phenomenal partnership with Rocky Mountain PBS, we were lucky enough to have some celebrity readers read the books this year to really get people engaged in paying attention to what the books that were nominated were and to get some excitement going about it. We're fortunate that this year we're going to be able to give out 75,000 books to 4-year-olds in Colorado, and we encourage folks to get to their libraries, to get to their local health clinics, and in Denver to access the program through their preschools. But it's really the one thing that we know starts the conversation, and it really is about giving these books away in a literacy-rich environment to children and families.
Well, it's a partnership. I think that's one of the things that we really knew at Qualistar Early Learning when I worked on that project, is that it's a partnership between the provider, the child, and the parent. Now, Ingrid, you're a parent of 4. Give us a sense of some of the things that you do at home. You have a 4-year-old, if I remember right. What you do at home to really enhance their learning in the summer.
Well, I have to say, I feel really lucky to have started out my career as a first grade teacher. I felt like I got some tools before I became a parent myself. But every day, whether it's the summer or the dead of winter, we are reading every single day. And we're, sitting down with a book with our children, following the words as we go along. I learned that helps kids see the importance of print and see that what I'm pointing to represents what I'm saying. So following the words along as I read, having the kids help with turning the pages, just engaging them in the whole ritual of sharing a book. I mean, I have a 10-year-old who still comes in for our nightly read aloud before she goes in and reads Harry Potter.
My kids are in their 20s, and it's frequent that we'll read something just because it's beautiful in the living room, and I think that's always an interesting thing to do. Joe, you've got this, you too are a parent, but you have the senior policy leadership role. How do you begin to meld both of those things to create an overarching framework to create change?
Well, we have to recognize what causes this gap when kids first show up. And we have to recognize that government by itself can't really fix it, neither can schools. So we need to work with parents. You were referring to the growing gap between the very rich and the very poor, even between the very rich and the middle class that's been documented recently. And we've seen that even as poor kids are making slight gains over the last 3 decades, the very rich are doing much better because they're so focused on child enrichment activities, and they're able to provide things for the kids that middle class and poor families are not providing. Part of it is just an awareness that those kind of enrichment activities are important. And so if we can get parents to recognize that they should use libraries and museums and simply communicate more with their kids, even if it's not reading, if it's just talking and asking them about their day and working those verbal skills.
That's so interesting, because you have Meaningful Differences, this wonderful book by Hart and Risley that talked about the difference between middle class kids, more affluent kids, and kids in poverty. And it's the volume of language they're exposed to. And I think that's one of those things that you have to think about, that word count matters.
Right.
And that when we talked about the defense statistics, if you only have a certain number of words that are said per day, with kids, negative words come to the fore, because don't put your hand on the stove should be said by all parents. But you're really great. This happens. Didn't you love that flower? Talk to me about that color. Those things.
Well, and that was so important about that Hart and Risley study that I think most people don't focus on. They focus on vocabulary, how many words, but not what kind of words. And one of the things that was in that study was that among lower income families, the words were often, the messages were more often negative than positive.
Yeah.
Don't do this, sit down, stop that, put that down, stay away. With the upper middle class folks, it was more positive and encouraging and empowering, and those are the things that we also need to tell parents. And when I read that study, it made me reflect on my own parenting and realize I was doing many of those things, and I think we all do without realizing it.
Well, I know my kids were blessed to have Hazel, who's an elementary school teacher like Ingrid, and that made a difference because you'd model the behavior that was there, and they're not complex behaviors.
No.
It's just like the greatest compliment ever paid to me was at the cooperative preschool, saying I was almost as good as a mom. But that idea that you talk together, that you spend time, that the book is the beginning, not the end of the conversation, I think is an essential component of it. Ingrid, it's significant to note that it's not, it's actually hopeful. The reality is, as Joe said, is that poor kids actually are getting better. That they're getting better in terms of where they were against the same group 20, 30 years ago. But the difference is growing. I think that's the issue
Right.
we're trying to talk about, is that in a really competitive society and in a competitive global economy, the accumulation of skills matters. So can you talk to us specifically about what you'll do on the floor of one of your classrooms during the week to get kids more ready?
Sure.
More competitive.
Sure. I think one of the core pieces of the Horizons magic, as I like to call it, is that we still acknowledge that it's summer. You know, we don't want them to be enjoying themselves. We want them to be engaged while they're learning. So every single day, Monday through Friday, we have reading instruction, some of it very deliberate and skills targeted reading instruction. We have a full-time reading specialist who works with our most needy students as well as with our teachers on developing our reading curriculum. So that's very intentional. They also have math daily. But in addition to the academic enrichment that we provide, they are swimming every day. They have daily swimming lessons. They have weekly field trips. Our oldest students, our middle schoolers, go on overnights in the mountains. And for me, the importance of that is these real life experiences, these life-changing experiences actually have a direct correlation to your literacy. And when you can make real life connections from text to experiences, you have made your life that much richer. And that's really what we're trying to do at Horizon.
The swimming thing, go ahead, Lindsay.
No,
It's
no,
great
no,
that you
you're
jump in.
fine.
The swimming thing reminds me, I never knew this until I got ready for today. Hazel mentioned it to me. It was in some of the literature that Lindsay and you had provided, that obesity rates go up in the
Right.
summer. The linkage between great reading and appropriate eating are really high.
Right.
Lindsay, can you address that to some extent, or is that an unfair question to ask?
No, not at all. I think it gives me an opportunity to talk about a couple of really great things. One that was spawned by what you were talking about, which is for families who don't have resources. I think one of the most underutilized things in the state is the state library system. And public libraries, a lot of people don't know this, but have this phenomenal summer reading program. We're actually highlighting it next week during Literacy Week, the launch of the summer reading program and getting kids involved. As a part of that, they do have a health component. I also would add that at the state, we, in the summertime, have been working on a summer food program for children and families, again, from lower income situations who during the year, they rely on school lunch. Mm-hmm. So in the summertime, we have created an alternative program for them to help continue to bring healthy foods into their homes. So apples and fruits and vegetables and some of those things, because it's critical.
Well, I'm going to pivot from you, Ingrid, to Joe, but constancy matters. I think not to have A, plan earlier, B, plan perpetually. One of the things that you guys do is constantly do it. You have to have a multi-year commitment to be part of that. So Joe, when you think about the challenges that you face as a funding entity for some of these programs, how do you address that issue of constancy in a really resource-poor environment today?
There's no question resources matter. And so what we're seeing is a lot of programs like Horizons, like other summer reading programs that we've seen around the state that have achieved remarkable success, is they're largely privately funded. They don't get government money. They go out and convince businesses, community members that this matters. And I think that really gets back to your question, but again, about the growing gap between rich and poor. I mean, there's a lot of things that rich people have that poor people don't have, and we accept that. But we need to think about why this gap is so important to all of us. not just to the poor. And we need to think about our future workforce. We need to think about the populations in the K-8 system. And we need to think about the fact that more jobs of the future will require a college degree than did previously. So we need all kids, not just wealthy kids, to have the opportunity to move successfully through the K-12 system and into higher education.
Let's talk about the resource issue for a brief while, and I want to actually feature something that we do at Rocky Mountain PBS. Hazel talked to me last night, and she said one of the biggest problems is that people don't have resources. And then I opened today with this idea from Reading is Fundamental that 2/3 of poor families have no books in the house. So here at Rocky Mountain PBS, we're known, of course, for our high-quality children's programming. And now we have a new education platform online that every parent should know about. It's called Rocky Mountain PBS Learning Media. And you can find it at rmpbs.pbslearningmedia.org. Again, let me read that again. It's at rmpbs.pbslearningmedia.org. It's on your screen. Once you get to that first page, you'll see that you can scroll down and browse material by age group. Click on the pre-K link, and you'll find hundreds of age-appropriate and free learning resources, including science, reading, cognitive development, really importantly math, which we'll want to talk about, and even more. Or from the home page, choose material by topic. Click on social studies, and then choose 4th grade, for example, on the next page. And you'll see tools for explaining, let's say, the American system of government as an example. You can also use the search box at the top to look for something very specific, economic, sustainability, I suppose. Rocky Mountain PBS Learning Media has more than 30,000 learning resources. It is the biggest free learning resource in the world for pre-kindergarten through high school. Included, you're going to find videos, self-paced lessons, and materials for teachers like lesson plans and professional development, all prepared by a range of trusted educational sources and all aligned with the Common Core state standards, which is critical for you. So it's one of those things that I think a lot of places don't think about us as a resource, but we're really determined, and that's one of the benefits you get by being a partner with Rocky Mountain PBS. And Lindsay, I think you know what we're doing. Who are some of the other partners that parents can rely upon during the summer?
So that Colorado State Libraries, again, a very underutilized organization. Reach Out and Read Colorado has been another critical partner for us. They can be found in most pediatricians' offices. Another resource for books, getting those out to folks, as well as a number of different programs like in the Valley. Save the Children is a program that's doing some really great work. Nurse Family Partnership. There's a whole host of different organizations that we partner with who offer a lot of opportunity for summertime.
Ingrid, what do you see continuing as the biggest challenges you're facing?
I think for me personally, the biggest challenge is that I wish we could serve more kids. Yeah. There's such a need, and at Horizons we can only serve so many. Yeah. And I think what we've demonstrated is, we were talking before about low-income kids not improving at the same rate as upper-income kids, but they can. I mean, Horizons has proven that if we give them the tools, we give them the resources, we get behind them for this longer period of time, they can make the gains.
That's a big deal, because I think that you guys do make progress. How do you demonstrate that you make progress? How do you measure? What are the metrics?
So we're big on data. We want to be able, especially since we rely so much on private funding, we really do need to show what we're doing and how we're doing it. We do pre-testing in May before our summer program, and then in the final week of the 6-week summer program, we do a post-testing. So for our youngest kids, we use the M-Class DIBELS, which is a reading assessment, and then for our grades 3 through 8, we use the Renaissance Learning Star assessment in both reading and math. And so they take a pre-test in May, much like what they have done often at their schools, and then at the end of the program, we test them again. And we're showing gains of 2 to 3 months in both reading and math every summer.
Well, that segues into something that the Lieutenant Governor, when I started in Rocky Mountain PBS, was one of my bosses as a member of my board of directors, and he would occasionally hammer me. So it's my opportunity to destroy his political career by asking this question. We talked about this summer slide. The school year, as it is today, it's kind of an artifact of a prior time. Talk to us about, should we reform the school year, Lieutenant Governor, and if so, how?
Well, you're right, and research makes it very clear that this summer slide is something that impacts even middle-class kids. And we should be doing something about it because it is an anachronism. And yet, as part of our bus tour, our early literacy bus tour 2 years ago, as we went around and visited schools and communities all around the state, we asked that question: should we have a different school calendar, a year-round school, so that you don't have one 3-month vacation, but you have 2 or 3 weeks at different times? And frankly, what we heard was that people didn't want that. They were used to the schedule that we have now. Families, upper middle class families, had vacation plans, they had things they wanted to do, and that's great for them because they are enriching their kids during that time. It's those other families that don't have those enrichment opportunities who are really suffering, and I do think we ought to be moving to a year-round schedule, but we've got to get the public to agree that that's something they want to do.
Yeah, I think that's a complicated issue. Lindsay, you spent a lot of time in this literacy issue. How have you seen summers in terms of caregiving, other things impact what you would like to have the outcomes become?
Well, I think it has a significant impact in terms of kids come back to school in the fall and often have had some of that learning loss. And so there's a bit of time that there's some remediation going on. But I have to say that, I actually am going to ask the Lieutenant Governor to talk about it, but we last year passed the READ Act.
Yeah.
And I think that is going to have a huge sort of return on the investment, right? Another big partner of ours is the Colorado Department of Education, but the READ Act is it's going to change things.
Well, let's talk about that because I've seen parts of it. I don't have a nuanced understanding of it. That's your job to provide.
Right. Well, the READ Act, and that stands for Reading to Ensure Academic Development, and it's really focused on early literacy. And among other things, it finally brings some resources in excess of $20 million to support early literacy activities. It also, more than any other law that we've had in the past, really focuses on engaging parents in the development of that READ plan so that we assess kids early, we determine whether they're behind or not, and if they're behind, how much, and then we create an individualized plan working with the parents and the school professionals to make sure that the child is getting the kind of individualized help he or she needs. We think that's really critical. It just brings focus, brings school focus and parental focus to a particular child's needs, and we think that's critical.
Let's talk, Ingrid, I'm going to ask you and Lindsay to tackle this a little bit. Let's talk specifically about schools as partners. The most trusted near peer for most parents is a teacher. What do schools do today, and what could they do better?
Do you want to?
Wow, this is a tough one. What do schools do an enormous amount today, and I have to tell you. So this last year, I've spent time tutoring a young girl in a Denver public school, and I have been unbelievably amazed by how much this school does. I think people underestimate what schools are doing at this point in time, particularly those of us who don't have kids. So they do a lot of things really well. They're looking to support families. They're looking to figure out how to do things like stop dropout prevention to keep kids present in school, even in elementary years, and reaching out to parents and saying, what's going on? How do we support you? In terms of what they could do better, I think looking at sort of the longitudinal piece and thinking about how do we change things in the sort of longer term rather than constantly being reactive. But I think that's sort of the nature of the beast, right? I mean, they're trying to help kids at that moment in time.
I just want to jump in quickly, Doug, because when we were on our early literacy bus tour a couple years ago, I remember sitting in a elementary school classroom in Durango and talking to teachers and talking about the importance of early literacy. And what I heard from teachers, and these were first and second and third grade teachers, is that they recognized that it was important, but they also realized that their teacher preparation program, when they were getting their degree, did not prepare them well. They didn't really know how to teach reading. They didn't really know what they could do to improve, and they really thought that professional development opportunities for them would be key if they were going to be more effective.
It's always, I promised you guys this was going to happen. You get to the end and you got 15 things you want to say. Quick answer, Horizons is a national group.
It is.
Do you see it growing, and is it different in other places because the needs are different?
It is a national organization. We're now almost up to 40 affiliates nationwide. The general premise is the same everywhere, but it does reflect the community in each of the different places that it is.
Okay. A significant achievement of the state, and again, at times the Department of Education nationally has been bedeviling, with the way they've supported us in the context of a local control. So it's been complicated for the national groups to support us, but a big victory was the Early Learning Challenge grant that you guys received. Mm-hmm. Talk about how that's going to be deployed, Lieutenant Governor, and what impact you think it'll have.
I think it'll have an enormous impact, Doug. It brings $30 million to the state to help improve the quality of early childhood education programs. So we're going to make more programs available to more parents, but importantly, they're going to be better programs, and they're going to be staffed by better trained professionals, and they're going to be rated in a very transparent way so parents know, is this a quality early learning center or not? But then we also have to make parents aware that early childhood education is really education. It's not just babysitting, it's not daycare, and that what children are learning at age 3 and 4 matters when they move into kindergarten and first grade.
It's amazing to me, as you know, having devoted 10 years to the quality ratings and improvement system, what this might mean over time to all of us. Let me ask Lindsay, I want to ask you to recap in about 20 seconds what's going to happen next week for Literacy Week. What's sort of some of the 3 key things that you see coming down?
3 key things during Literacy Week. I think the first one is that we'll be celebrating a lot of accomplishments. If you go to colorado.gov/Lieutenant Governor, you'll find a list of the activities going on, and a lot's happening. The second that I'd like to highlight is the One Book for Colorado distribution that starts. And the third thing I would say is really highlighting our partners like the State Library. So we'll be launching the summer reading program next week.
Golly, I wish we could go on, but that's all the time we have for tonight on Colorado Quarterly for this month of May 2013. My thanks to this thoughtful guest panel, Lieutenant Governor Joe Garcia, Lindsay Dolce, Ingrid Moore. So please, this summer, visit our PBS Learning Media site at Rocky Mountain PBS. Thank you for tuning in tonight and for your support of Rocky Mountain PBS. I'm President and CEO Doug Price. Good night.